Welcome to Mulready Minutes with Oklahoma Insurance Commissioner Glenn Mulready. This is a podcast about insurance for insurance folks, risk managers, and business leaders. We'll dive deep and look at what is and isn't working, talk to leaders in the industry, and keep you informed on what's happening in Oklahoma and around the country.
Hi, this is Oklahoma Insurance Commissioner Glenn Mulready. Welcome to another episode of our Mulready Minute podcast. We have a great guest today that I'll be excited to introduce you to. It's a topic that is slightly out of the lane of insurance, not real technical and detailed to the insurance side, but is a big issue. So really looking forward to it. So we want to welcome today our special guest, Robin Meyer. And I will just, Robin, welcome. Glad to have you on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, I'm going to read your bio just so I don't miss anything. But Robin's a seasoned professional in technology law, including cybersecurity, data privacy, and AI. She's a partner at Innovative Technology Law Group in Oklahoma City. Previously, she was General Counsel and Data Protection Officer at TokenEx and spent 8 years as Deputy General Counsel at OMES, where she led the legal side of statewide IT initiatives. Robin holds multiple data privacy certifications and is actively involved in Oklahoma Women in Technology, Women in Cybersecurity, and Women in AI Governance. Her passion for all things tech and her ability to simplify complex topics make her an engaging speaker. With her experience speaking about technology, we are ready to hear from you today. So, Robin, that's a lot. It's a mouthful. You're in the thick middle of a really quickly evolving area.
Always changing.
So tell me about sort of your start into just even that space, just into technology to begin with.
Oh, right. Well, I was a developer before I went to law school. And at the time, silly me, I thought, well, I don't know if there's anything to this whole developer thing, so I probably need to go, get a job that can really be a career. So I went to law school, and then here I am full circle, all the way back around.
Yeah, back into that technology
So when
space.
I was hired by OMES, I was hired as the state's first IT lawyer. And so I had transaction
And what was that
experience.
time frame?
2012. It was right after, it was right in the thick of bringing in a lot of the other agencies' information and all of that whole transformation, consolidation, unification, however you want to say it.
Yeah, that was a big move back then, too. I was in the legislature at that time. So, yeah. Okay, so now cybersecurity, it's a big topic in so many different ways, but talk about sort of the evolution of cybersecurity. I guess when I think of it as a non-technology guy, what I'm concerned about is, technology can do such wonderful and efficient things and all these great things, but also at potential great risk, right? And in the insurance world, we're concerned always about risk. That's what we are about. So talk a little bit about how that cybersecurity risk has evolved from early days, not early days of computers, but over the last dozen years, as you just when you entered into that.
That's funny you would ask me that. I remember really distinctly one day when I was at OMES, and I had a plethora of contracts in front of me, right? And I said, do we have a security department? And they said, there's this one guy, and he's at the end of the hall, and I about hyperventilated. I said, we have one guy. And of course, today, they have a team, right? They have a whole incident response center that shows all the attacks coming, from various countries and things like that. So I kind of think a lot of times it's like we all went to sleep one night and we woke up and technology exploded. And then there we all are running after the train.
Yeah.
It's a little like that.
Yeah, it is. I know even at our national level, when we talk about AI and some of those things, I often say, because what I'll hear is we need to get in front of this. And my response to some of that is, I don't know that we'll ever get in front of it. We need to stay in the rearview mirror as close as we can.
That's so right. Right. In front of it, I don't know. That's a lofty goal.
Yeah.
But it has really evolved. It continues to evolve. The way that bad actors come in is evolving. And that's one thing I think that really, and with, like you mentioned, AI is really good for cybersecurity. It's also it's also really helpful for the bad actors.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about why AI is good for cybersecurity.
So it's good for cybersecurity in that, like for instance, is I love to read these reports that come out annually where they've asked, hundreds and thousands of CISOs and people like that, what are their practices, what are they seeing, costs of breach and things like that. And so one thing that there's a yearly IBM cost of a data breach study, it's been out for years, came out a few months ago. And it showed that if you use AI and automation in your cybersecurity program extensively, that it will reduce the cost of a breach about 45%. Now, that's a meaningful percentage for the insurance industry, on the risk side. And I suspect that's because you have more accurate positives. So when you look at something and you think, oh, is that an event? It more likely really is, so you're not wasting time.
Mm-hmm.
And you're catching something earlier, perhaps. There are some technologies that are out there, CrowdStrike, which maybe we'll talk about.
Mm-hmm.
CrowdStrike's one of them, and Zscaler, Darktrace. And they look across at behavior. And so that's another way that AI and technology can help cyber. Because for us to do that individually would be very hard. To look at a system and then the next and then the next. And so getting a tool that can intuitively look across and look at, oh, that's an anomaly.
Yeah.
Josie in HR usually isn't in the finance, system.
Got it. Okay.
Why is that?
That's helpful. But before we get into details of some of these other things, I guess I want to start sort of at the mitigation. Right. So how does and personal example for the Oklahoma Insurance Department, I forget, maybe 3 years ago, before every agency was covered under the cyber insurance of the state. And I want to say maybe 4 years ago, everybody received a communication that, hey, you need to complete this form to tell us about what you're doing from a mitigation standpoint. And if you check all the right boxes, you're good to be with Still Blend. But if not, you're on your own to go get cyber insurance. It really there was a clear delineation just a few years ago. Now, luckily, we were doing all the things right, so we're good to be covered under that state plan. But that's the mitigation path, right? And so, what can a company do to mitigate potential for cyber security breach?
Well, I think one, of course, is to use those tools, right? That when you look at, for any entity and maybe for insurance department, it might be different than, say, health department, which might be different than wildlife department. And, thinking about what are the big risks that really we think we're susceptible to, and particularly being citizen facing, right? Might be different if it were banking, with financial information or things like that. And thinking about, well, what are the risks we have? And then what are the tools we can automate with or put AI into our cyber program that cuts the widest swath? We kind of get the bang for our buck in protection.
Mm-hmm.
And then really, I think a lot of times too, it's so overwhelming to start somewhere and to look at, for instance, one thing I've helped our clients with is I looked at in a cybersecurity application, what are the priorities they have? Well, that tells us what they believe a mature program to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just have to start somewhere.
Yeah, build around that.
Yes, and then just layer. Right.
Yeah, I think too, from my experience, a big part of it is just educating too, because so many of these attacks come from one person clicking on one item.
Is so funny you said that. That same IBM report listed the factors that reduce a cost of breach, and the number one factor was employee training.
Yeah.
Which I was surprised that was the number one. Right below it was AI and automation tools and the such. But what you just said is the most effective thing that can be done.
Yeah. Well, and you've got it. Just last week, I was on in a meeting. I'm on a national board that handles all insurance licensing. And now they did not have a data breach or a cyber attack, but they had a pretty major phishing expedition, right? So even as simple as that is, an email going to someone, hey, you have an outstanding invoice, and not for like $100, but you get that out to hundreds of thousands of people.
Right.
And when you would click on it, it would take you to a website that looked official, looked like our board website, but
That's right.
it certainly was not. And so,
That's a bad actor using AI.
yeah.
They, back in the day when they had misspellings and, things like that, didn't look quite right. And all that has been really helped with AI. So the bad actors are using AI to make emails look just exactly like you'd expect, like from your bank or like from the insurance commission or whatever, particularly where there's going to be transfer of money or data, but a lot of times money.
Yeah.
It's called business email compromise. And now, though, there's starting to be companies that are coming out that can, again, I mean, it's a little like, pickleball, right? It's like the ball goes over and someone, gets a hit. Okay, well, now we've got a solution that can help that. And, it just continues to evolve. I saw something that I hadn't seen in thinking about this podcast that on one hand, I did know about this, that one thing that's become really prevalent for bad actors is to come in using access credentials. In other words, your login. So they're coming in, it looks like you.
Mm-hmm.
And so until some tool figures out that you're moving in a way that doesn't look right, they just think it's you.
Yeah.
And they actually have brokers who sell those access credentials. Right. That was a wild. But so it's become more that than what used to be just hacking, literally hacking in.
Mm-hmm.
But now even that.
They're coming in the front door.
Yes, that's exactly right. They come in the front door and they take the data or the money. They take that out the front door. But even on the hacking side, they've changed malware where it's called polymorphic malware. And it gets in and it uses AI to say, okay, the insurance department thinks I look like this and it's going to detect me. So I'm going to self-modify and I'm going to change myself like a chameleon. And I'm going to look a little different. And so I won't be detected. And then when the insurance commission or whatever the entity is figures out that, well, I'm going to morph a little bit more. And so it's really hard to detect.
Yeah, this whole space is, I know at different conferences I've been in sessions, and it just, you come away from that, it's pretty scary. Like, it's just sort of intimidatingly scary. But
it is. It is. Hard. But, that's why, it's definitely not something that you do alone, right?
Yeah. Well, let's go into a couple of specifics just so you can kind of dissect that maybe for us. I know you mentioned CrowdStrike, and maybe we'll go to that last. But I know at the very local level, seems targeted lately has been healthcare systems. We've had two major breaches at two major healthcare systems in Tulsa, and literally shut some of them down for quite some time. That couldn't do some of that, which is really scary within a healthcare system. Some of the lab, you couldn't have lab work done. They were having to divert that elsewhere for quite a while because of that. So any thoughts you might have on why they're targeting, where they target, and then we can get into CrowdStrike.
Yeah, well, I think I noticed the same thing. Healthcare and education seem to just be hit proportionately more a lot of times. I think critical infrastructure, I think that's the healthcare piece. It's one of the critical infrastructure sectors, or 16 of them that have been identified. And it's all the ones that you think, what would cripple us if those systems were removed from us, right? So it's energy, financial services, and healthcare is definitely one. And I think, I know right before we went on live, there was some talk about the new act in Oklahoma, about the Data Security Act. And I saw a bit of that and was really pleased to see that there's going to be an emphasis. I saw it doesn't go into this part until 2026, but I was really pleased to see that there's an emphasis on vendor management, because a lot of times those come in through supply chain. Mm-hmm. So it's somebody you've hired, and you have in a contract that they're using best practices, but you don't really know. And so evaluating kind of the risk of different vendors and then assessing that risk differently for one versus, it's not a money thing. It's a how much access to information or how critical are they coming into the healthcare system. even whether they cost a lot or not.
Yeah.
It's what do they have access to? And
We
trying to
experienced that nationally. I guess that was about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. Now, Change
Yes.
Healthcare was a huge
Yes.
break, and I know that for a lot of us nationally, it was a wake up call. And number one, had no idea how deeply their tentacles, if you will, went within the insurance system, the healthcare system. I mean, health insurance plans were utilizing them for
Yes.
one service, where health systems were using them for a different service, but they really had a major impact. And that was a situation, as I recall, that had to do with an acquisition. United Healthcare acquired Change Healthcare, but they had not been brought up to those cybersecurity standards, if you will. So,
Yes.
two-party authentication, something like that, is what allowed that breach to happen.
Right.
Was, I'm sure United Healthcare has substantial standards in place, but it was a acquisition that hadn't been brought up to those standards yet.
And that happens. Yes, I mean, Marriott Starwood was that too, right? They acquired a hotel chain, same thing. This reminds me of something that happened, and I'll not, I'll protect, the innocent here, but some years back when we put in the, periodically the state insurance, for employees, all the different plans that are offered comes up for bid.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we got the bids in, we insisted that if you were bidding to be an insurance plan provider and you're going to use a subcontractor, we want them to fill out that security assessment as well. I was really paranoid after the Target breach where their HVAC people caused this breach. And so I kept just saying, Target. So we required them to fill out it's like 400 questions. They balked, and it was, you can just imagine the pushback, right? But of all the bidders, and they had various subcontracting parties, 2 of the subcontractors just went dark.
Yeah.
Which tells us that's the wrong subcontractor.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's the old adage, isn't it, that you're only as strong as your weakest link in that scenario.
So they replaced those subcontractors, and we continued on and, awarded to, plans. But had we not done that, they would have had exactly what you're talking about. They would have had people feeding into them, having our information, who would have had substandard to who knows what, little to none, cyber program.
Yeah. Well, let's move to CrowdStrike.
Yes.
We mentioned that earlier. That was a big one that I think a lot of people certainly heard about, and a lot of people were impacted by, not in the healthcare system, but certainly on the travel side of things. But
Right. Talk
about that for a minute, of what happened and what the impact was, maybe ending with what lessons were learned from that.
Yes. So I'll just start with saying, because I'm long on CrowdStrike. I think they're a good company. They're good at what they do. But it really does bring up the distinction, right, between an outage and a cybersecurity, hacking event. It was an outage.
Don't say breach.
Yeah, it's not a breach. It was not a breach. And you could tell, and the funny thing is sometimes when things happen, you think, is that a breach? And you could tell that wasn't a breach because they fixed it almost immediately and sent the fix out. And you can't fix a breach that quickly. You're still struggling to figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, the thing about the CrowdStrike outage that was really tough was that where their product sits is kind of when you think of just all the computer layers of any organization, like layers of an onion, right? And you go down to the very center, and there's this nucleus piece where hardware meets software, and it's just right down in like the core of the earth, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they sit. And so, something that goes wrong there, and I really felt terrible for the CrowdStrike people. I kept thinking, oh, I just feel so bad for whoever the team was, right, that missed something. They updated their product. They laid it in, and they've learned their own lessons that have come out in the industry.
And it came about because of an update, correct?
Yes. And they just, from what I understand, they just blanket updated everybody. And then, of course, we had a global problem. And they've since said in the future they won't update like that. They'll update in layers, right? so that it doesn't have that if there's something that's wrong.
It's limited.
Right. But one thing about that, though, because it wasn't a cyber breach, and on one hand, when you fill out those cybersecurity applications, using a tool like a CrowdStrike is a plus. Because what it signals is that, so on average, a breach isn't discovered for about 200 days. And I've seen one report that said if they have, like, your login access credentials, it's 292 days on average.
Yeah.
So the longer it goes, right, the risk goes up, the cost goes up, everything. So normally you think about a CrowdStrike and you think, well, that's a good thing because they're going to see the anomaly and they're going to pull that average down. And so the cost of the breach is going to be less, et cetera. On the business interruption side, though, because it's not a cyber event, but boy, was it an interruption event,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so then you've got impact there differently. And so I really thought about it, about, a conversation of, if someone had tried to even bring up, but, well, I'll go back a little bit. CrowdStrike terms I already knew are really tough to negotiate. They don't really move on their terms. And so when this happened, I thought, well, I wonder how good a deal Microsoft or the airlines had, right?
Mm-hmm.
Were they able to move the needle on the liability? And at least for the airlines, it doesn't look like they were.
Yeah.
And so, someone's making business decisions, right? They offer strong protection, but if anything happens, it's an error on their side, it's going to be really limited liability.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to get much back for that. And so people just kind of, it's like everything, you eat the third piece of cake until you have the heart attack, right?
Yeah.
And so you just don't, you think, oh, well, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And it may never
Till
happen.
it does.
Right, exactly.
Well, you bring up a point as we wrap up here that I think the average person does not understand. I think the average person, and it's something I've recently learned really, but thinks that when a hack or something happens, someone gets in there and boom, things are going bad. But you just mentioned how long the bad actor is, to just put that term in there, is in the system.
Right.
And I remember learning that with Change Healthcare situation, and you just mentioned a couple others that were 200 days.
Right.
They get in and they're kind of navigating all around in the dark without you knowing
Right.
it. Yeah.
And they have plenty of time to go back in time and get data that's sitting there. There was a debt collection agency that was just came out, was hacked a few months ago. And unfortunately, they're not really offering any aid. So all their customers, like Comcast is one of their customers, they're having to step up and provide all the protections to the consumer that normally the debt collection agency would have had to have provided. But the thing about that was they'd stopped using them 4 years before, but the data was still left in the system.
They were able to go back.
So, right, exactly.
Good. Well, Robin, thank you. I mean, I think we could sit and talk for quite a while about this, but
My husband says I can clear a room talking about this.
But it is a very timely, hot topic because
Yes.
it's a big issue that folks need to be on top of to try to mitigate that loss, make sure they're doing the right things to do that. So thank you for joining us on this. And
Well, it was my pleasure. And kudos to Oklahoma for passing the Data Security Act.
Good.
The Insurance Data Security Act.
Thank you for that. Okay. Well, that wraps up our most recent edition here of the Mulready Minute podcast with Robin Meyer talking about cybersecurity and threats and breaches and hacks and bad actors. So we will see you next time on Mulready Minute podcast.
If you found this episode informative, please subscribe and share with your colleagues. Visit oid.ok.gov/podcast. Let us know what topics you would like to hear about on this podcast. Until next time, take care from the Oklahoma Insurance Department.